He's just going to tell us a bit about the final project. So you can tell us your role and your main responsibilities throughout the duration of the project.
I was assigned two roles at the beginning of the project. First was to be co-chairman with yourself. Um, what that involved was the day-to-day running of the project, organising meetings, setting agendas for the meetings so that they're run smoothly. Also, it was to act sort of as a middleman between the peers on the course and the lecturers. Um, it was at times quite challenging, as some people on the course are quite harder to motivate than others, but on the whole, I think me and yourself have filled that role to a good degree.
Okay.
My other role was as a production member, but due to circumstances, once we got back from Easter, I had to take on the role of creative director of the Raikuda piece. So my roles swapped somewhat halfway through.
That's something you were happy to do?
At first, I wasn't that happy, as I've done well on my production module, and I was quite looking forward to tackling in the studio, but I think for the greater good of the project, I think it was the right decision.
Okay. So how would you describe your success within the roles that you had, and what problems did you encounter, and how did you overcome them?
Well, I think, as an overall opinion, I think I've filled the rules that I've taken up to a satisfactory standard. I think as a chairman, I didn't enforce myself too much on people. I allowed them to have their say, their opinion, and I made sure that they were heard without being a figure of authority. I acted much more as a democratic sort of chairman. And as far as the creative director for the Raikuda piece, and even I spent a lot of time in the studio recording on other people's songs and recording my song, and I think I was pretty no nonsense where I'd go in, do my take, do what was asked of me. If people wanted to change things, I'll go back in and do another take. So I think all round I'm satisfied with how I've worked and the amount of effort I've put in. There were quite a few snags and problems when I was in the studio. I mean, things like having to learn Amy's guitar part in the space of about 15 minutes and then be recorded. That was a problem. Also, my song idea for the Raikuda was based on Don't Call Me Red, and I wanted to make this Americana song that had a clear devised three sections, and it was quite hard to do the tangent between the sections. So it started off with this Americana piece at the beginning, and then it was hard for me to come up with somewhere to go by myself. So obviously that's when you came in and John came in, and I think it was a melting pot of ideas that sort of helped me progress on my songwriting, as opposed to me directly tackling the song by myself. But you know, I think that's another thing that comes into it. You need to be able to let people help you, and not be worried to put your hand up and say, I need an outsider's opinion on this. I think it's all a learning curve. So.
Okay. So like sort of going on further what you've just talked about, and sort of like what have you learned throughout the project, and like what have you learned from any mistakes you've made, and sort of what were those mistakes that you've made along the way, and how have you like sort of dealt with them?
I have made a few mistakes. I think at the beginning when I went into songwriting over Easter, I didn't look into the albums in as much depth. So the first lot of songs that I come back with, aside from the Raikuda, they got scrapped, and I think I mean, I wouldn't disappoint in that because it was early days and there was a lot of people bringing forward ideas. But I think that was a weakness, particularly on the Laura Marlin song, because I was happy with what I'd written, but it didn't refer to Laura Marlin as well as other people's songs, and I think that's why it wasn't chosen. But all that you could do in that situation is just get on with it. You can't sit around sulking that your songs didn't get chosen. I know why they didn't get chosen, and you just got to pick yourself up and get on with a different task.
How do you think things could have been better handled throughout the project, or just dealt with in general? Like, what improvements you could suggest?
Improvements.
Or what would you do like if you had another time round?
If I had another time round, I would enforce myself more on trying to get people in, because as you know, some people struggle with attendance, and I think at times I'm more inclined to not give them a kick up the ass that they need. Other things like going into the studio, I was being recorded in the studio, but where my roles had switched between being a producer and then it switched to being a creative director and focusing much more on the songwriting aspect of it. I went into the studio and I think it would have aided me to have a little bit more knowledge of how, say when I went in to do Amy's song, how Laura Marlin was recorded and what the production team done on that, and the same with Raikuda. I've looked into them, but maybe a bit of detail, a little bit more detail was probably needed.
Okay.